This is The Big Breakdown, a long look back at some of the biggest stories we're covering for you at the Hidden Killers Podcast and True Crime Today. This is the Hidden Killers Podcast with Tony Bruschi and continuing coverage of the case against Bryan Kohberger.
It was the moment that nobody saw coming, or at least not in the way it played out. After nearly 3 exhausting years of relentless courtroom battles, endless motions, and seemingly bottomless legal maneuvers by Bryan Kohberger's defense team, the sudden plea deal behind pretty much all of this blindsided everyone. Families who'd braced themselves for a trial, ready to look the man accused of brutally murdering their loved ones in the eye and demand answers, were instead given a PDF attachment on a Sunday night, essentially saying, hey, guess what? No trial, it's over. Call it jarring is an understatement. It's been perceived as outright insulting by many close to the victims. Today, we're diving deep with defense attorney and former prosecutor Eric Faddis, a man who knows the complexities of cases like these from both sides of the courtroom. Eric's insight is particularly valuable because he understands the calculations prosecutors make, what defense attorneys grapple with behind closed doors, and maybe most importantly, how the emotional landscape of victims' families often collides with the cold, bureaucratic machinery of the legal system. There's a lot we're going to unpack here, and I want to hear your thoughts in the comments section on YouTube. If you're not there already, search Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi to find us there so you can comment. If you're on the podcast platforms, lovely. Thank you for being there. Please hit subscribe. Also, check out YouTube. So, why did the prosecution choose now, of all moments, mere weeks from trial, to accept this plea? If the option of taking the death penalty off the table was never going to be considered, why not do it months or even years ago, saving families the prolonged anguish and taxpayers the colossal expense? Eric brings unique perspective to this question, having made similar calculations himself during his career. We're also going to tackle the emotional fallout. The families of Ethan, Kaylee, Maddie, and Xana, they've been thrust through a harrowing emotional grinder, built up, let down, and in many cases, left feeling entirely ignored. Steve Gonzalez, Kaylee's father, went public with his outrage, igniting a firestorm by urging supporters to voice their anger directly to the judge. An act that, while understandable, drew surprising backlash from the bench itself. Eric will help us sort through the legal ethics and emotional nuances of that exchange, and perhaps most critically, we'll explore the statement from prosecutor Bill Thompson, a reveal that frankly felt underwhelming, considering the stakes. There were no surprises, no explosive new evidence, just a stripped-down recounting of details we already knew. Was this strategy oversight or an unfortunate byproduct of an inexperienced jurisdiction navigating uncharted waters? Let's get into it, starting with the big question. Eric, are you surprised that the plea was even extended at this point?
Pretty surprised that the plea was even extended at this point.
Yeah.
Look, usually in a death penalty case, it's prudent. If you're going to plead it out as a prosecutor, take death off the table, put the person in prison for the rest of their life, make that decision early on. So you're saving the victims' families all of this heartache and turmoil and trepidation about an upcoming trial. You're saving the government money if you do that. I was sort of surprised that it came down this close to trial. I'm just wondering sort of what motivated the prosecutor to do it now and not 2 years ago or something.
Well, and that's a big question. From what we understand is that the ask, the hey, can we get a plea deal, came from Kohberger's team. They're the ones who came to the prosecutor and said, what do you got? You got anything? You want to offer us something? And they came back and they said, okay, we'll agree, take death off the table for this. I guess why? I mean, do we know if something like this was offered way back when, or why would we wait all of this time if we're going to ever extend that olive branch? Almost 3 years in, all of this hell, all of this money. If we're ever going to do it, why not try it back then?
Totally. And you look at if this had been a case where defense had been super successful in motions practice and excluded a bunch of experts and stuff, and the prosecution had a good case in the beginning, and then towards trial they're like, we got some problems, now we got to plead it out. It's one thing, but that's not what happened here. The defense, though they made valiant efforts, did not really damage the prosecution's case during its entire pendency. And so, if you're sitting pretty a few weeks before trial, your case is almost as strong as it was in the beginning. I just don't get extending it now. If as a prosecutor, you're going to be okay with this kind of plea offer, the Band-Aid off, get it over and done with in the beginning, save everybody money and heartache and everything else. And they didn't do that.
Was this, a case where, really the prosecution never intended to offer them anything, but it just kind of came to the 11th hour, and Taylor's exhausted all of her options. She really has thrown every damn thing out there to see what could stick, and nothing really stuck. How do you think this went behind the scenes? Do you think this was a come to Jesus with Ann Taylor and Kohberger, or do you think this was Kohberger in his kind of weird calculated mode going, we've tried everything, let's do this? It's conjecture, but what do you think?
I just don't think it could have been that the prosecution was gung-ho on seeking death the whole time, hadn't even considered whether they'd allow this kind of plea offer, and then, defense is asking for it, so now let's think about it. No, at the beginning of this trial, or the beginning of this case, rather, the prosecution absolutely had in mind, hey, do we take death off the table and secure convictions for these 4 victims and ensure that this person never touches free society again? You better believe they've been thinking about that for years. And so the timing of it, even if it did come at the behest of the defense, prosecution had to have been thinking about this and whether they would agree to it years ago. And if they had agreed to it now, I don't see why their position would have been different 2 years ago and why they didn't just try to resolve it at that point.
Yeah, it is baffling. The families obviously are the ones that are feeling this the worst. And it's a mixed bag. The majority, I would say, from who has spoken out, are not happy with this. It's not a majority vote. It's not a vote at all. In fact, very little say is what we're learning in terms of their influence on the decision by the DA to accept this plea deal. Steve Gonsalves coming out very angry. Some of the others have come out and said, this is horrible. We've been treated horribly by the DA's office here. Just from a legal standpoint, how do these things normally get handled when it comes to something like this, where you have victims' families that should be considered in the decision? And it seems that, it was a Sunday night PDF that was sent out going, read the attached.
Yeah, in terms of how these are usually handled, not like this. When I was a prosecutor, especially on a death case, if we're considering a plea offer, we got to get in front of that. And so and in Colorado and most jurisdictions have a victims' rights law like this. The victims are entitled to be informed of key proceedings and also to be informed of any plea offer and to give input on that plea offer. And the prosecutor has to consider that input. Doesn't have to make the ultimate decision, but the prosecutor has to consider that. My understanding is that these victims were consulted very briefly days before, and that I think at least one of the victims' families said that they didn't feel they had been adequately informed at all. And so they're sort of left hanging with this, new development in a case involving the death of their child. And they're kind of saying, hey, you didn't talk to us about this sufficiently, and you didn't hear us out in terms of what we want. And I think that is absolutely a misstep by the prosecutor if that's how it happened.
What was your reaction when the first order of business during the hearing, the change of plea hearing, was Judge Hippler scolding Steve Gonsalves without basically saying his name? Steve had gone on with Brian Entin on News Nation the previous night, had encouraged people to call the office, to call the judge's office. It wasn't like go to his house with picket signs. It was call, let your voice be heard. And then the judge's response was, I have not and will not listen. In fact, he's sending him to the authorities should anyone need to listen to the calls. I don't think the intent was go threaten the judge. It was just, we're not happy. And if you're not going to listen to us, I'm going to basically empower all of these thousands of people who are watching and passionate about this as well to be heard. And you're still sitting there going, la, 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 we're going to do it the way we want. It seemed rather tone deaf, but I mean, I'm just a lay person. What was your thoughts?
I think tone deaf and also a little whiny. Hey, look, you're presiding over a nationally publicized quadruple homicide case, and there's a massive decision coming up that has been polarizing to the public, to that specific community, the public more generally. Look, you're going to get people who have thoughts about that, and deal with it, bro. Like it's not it's something you need to be complaining about and starting the plea hearing off in a way that sort of implies that one of the victim's fathers did something improper when I don't think they did at all. I thought that was a weird way to start it and just not really becoming of a jurist.
No, I mean, I've appreciated his little more directness in this, where he's not taking a lot of crap and going for everything Ann Kohberger asks for, and I think that's been good. But that was a big turnoff of that moment there in the courtroom. It seemed rather odd. Were you surprised at all by what was revealed in the statement that Bill Thompson gave? I mean, essentially, I've been kind of summarizing it as a mini version of what the opening statements would have been, of what he gave the other day. He laid out what the evidence was. It really wasn't any more than what we already knew about. I mean, or would there have been more things up his sleeve that he just wasn't saying? Because there was nothing shocking there. I mean, it was pretty much everything that we knew about, and less, I think, than what we thought we knew about even. There was no evidence of contact, according to Bill, of Kohberger with the people in that residence. I think we were all thinking there's going to be some sort of a something. Nothing. Were you surprised by any of that?
So I was surprised. Yes, I was surprised by the way it was presented and the content of that presentation. So when there's a plea that's going to happen like this, usually the prosecutor lays out either an offer of proof or a factual basis, they're synonymous, to say, hey, here are the facts that would be presented that justify a person pleading guilty to a crime because, like, hey, we could back it up and they're going to be convicted. But yeah, it was rather limited. It was, no bombshells that we haven't heard about. And I wonder if, the victims' families were kind of hoping for something a little bit more gung-ho, a little bit more impassioned and incriminating for Bryan Kohberger. But this was the way the prosecutor chose to do it. And I'll note that, this is kind of a smaller jurisdiction and they're not used to handling huge murder cases and having, 4 victims' families listen to every word they say. So perhaps that affected what that record was like.
Coming out of this conversation with Eric, it's hard not to feel like we're all still searching for answers that the legal system just isn't set up to provide. We started this discussion wondering why the prosecution decided to agree to Bryan Kohberger's plea deal now, of all times, and not 2 years earlier. The fact is, Eric pointed out how puzzling this decision truly is, especially since the prosecution's case remained rock solid throughout the process. This wasn't a last-minute move driven by some unexpected setback. This was deliberate. This was strategic. But the strategy itself remains mystifying, leaving families hurt, confused, and angry. Eric's insights into the prosecutorial mindset shed valuable light on why a deal like this might usually occur early on to spare victims' families and conserve public resources. But clearly, in this case, that standard practice was tossed out the window. Now we're left asking, was this justice or was it convenience? Did the DA's office prioritize expediency or avoidance of embarrassment over emotional and psychological well-being of the grieving families? The process seems to have done very little to honor the family's trauma or dignity. Another takeaway is the alarming way victims' families were treated, almost as an afterthought. Sending out critical updates via Sunday night PDFs hardly screams empathy or professionalism. And the judge's reaction to Steve Gonzalez's passionate plea for public engagement, perceived as tone-deaf and oddly defensive, raises even deeper questions. Who is the system really serving when families' pain is brushed aside so callously? And what about the evidence, or rather the lack thereof, in Thompson's courtroom statement? Here was the prosecution's moment to lay it all out, to justify their decision and validate 3 years of intense scrutiny and emotional torment. Yet, what we got felt sterile and frankly disappointing. Eric suggested that perhaps smaller jurisdictions aren't equipped for the emotional weight and high-profile nature of cases like these. But if that's true, does it excuse them or simply expose a flaw in our system? Ultimately, today's conversation makes clear there are no easy answers, just lingering, painful questions. Bryan Kohberger will spend the rest of his life behind bars, yes. But does the path that got us here truly represent justice? Or did the prosecutors, the defense, and even the judge stumble through a messy compromise, one that left emotional scars, confusion, and distrust in its wake?
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast with Tony Bruschi and continuing coverage of the case against Bryan Kohberger.
From day one, the Bryan Kohberger case felt less like a straightforward true crime story and more like some twisted psychological puzzle, tailor-made for a Netflix special, minus the popcorn. But here's the kicker. Instead of unraveling, this puzzle has only gotten more complicated, more haunting, and somehow more infuriating. Kohberger's sudden decision to plead guilty threw a true crime community into a tailspin, and just as we were bracing ourselves for the spectacle of a trial, he stepped off the ride, took control, and basically said, "I'll decide how this ends, not you." But why? Today, we're diving deep into the psychological maze behind Kohberger's choice. Joining me to unpack the twisted journey is retired FBI special agent and former chief of the Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program, Robin Dreeke. Robin's expertise in reading what makes dangerous people tick is precisely what we need to decode this bizarre final chapter of Kohberger's public story with. In our conversation, we're going to explore how control, something Kohberger clearly craves but consistently failed to achieve, may have played a central role in his plea. This wasn't about avoiding death or sparing his family the agony of a trial. This was Kohberger's way of reclaiming the narrative, asserting dominance in a situation where he'd lost all power. Robin sheds new light on how his plea might have offered Kohberger exactly what he'd been missing: the chance to orchestrate his own future behind bars, even if that future means becoming a permanent fixture in criminal psychology textbooks. But what's most chilling about this discussion isn't just the why, it's the what's next. Robin and I break down whether Kohberger's upcoming sentencing could mirror the infamous Dennis Rader BTK spectacle. Could Kohberger, who idolized serial killers, follow Rader's footsteps, using the courtroom as his personal stage to meticulously detail his atrocities? Or will he carefully guard his secrets, drip-feeding them over the time to maintain his twisted brand of notoriety? And finally, we'll confront perhaps the darkest question yet. Does Bryan Kohberger pose a continued threat behind bars? If killing provided him the emotional thrill he'd been chasing his entire life, what happens now that he's permanently confined among others, people who might not see him as a criminal, but as a trophy? But before we get into all of that, let's address the elephant in the room: control. Robin, how much do you think this elusive, intoxicating concept of control factored into Kohberger's sudden guilty plea? Control. How much do you think that calculated into this choice as well? Because it was fairly out of control for him. Everything he was trying to throw at the wall and stick did not. This is the first one where, okay, he's got control of everything, basically. It's done. He threw the towel in. Now he can go forward and be in control of certain things, obviously not his freedom, but if somebody wants to study him, talk to him, he's going to get to go down that road. And putting him back in control, I wonder how much that of the emotions that he does have, control is likely one of them. And something that he certainly was not having any sort of grip on in recent years.
Yeah, that's a fair point, and I agree. Regaining control of more of his life than he's had, probably definitely a motivation factor as well. That's why he seemed pretty comfortable yesterday with everything, because he felt, again, I think he always just likes to plan the path forward.
Yeah.
And he wasn't able to plan the path forward too much just because everything was in chaos, because he was in chaos. But now that it's got resolution and moving forward, it's stabilized that crazy brain.
Pure speculation on this. Sentencing is going to be coming up. Check my notes. July 23rd and possibly the 24th at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. They have the extra day in there in case they need it for the victim impact statements. Do you think we're going to see a repeat of what we saw with Dennis Rader, considering the connections here? I mean, Catherine Ramsland, the one that wrote the book on him, now it looks like she's probably going to write the book on Kohberger. That's my conjecture out of it. I would not be surprised at all. But BTK was one who, in his sentencing, at the very last minute, did the same thing, stood up and said, I did it. We don't have to do the trial now. And admitted, but then in sentencing, went through it. 45-minute recitation about everything that he did. Do you think we're going to see Kohberger stand up and attempt to do that at the impact statements, or is this a different animal where he's going to cower and be very selective at where and how he shares his story?
Boy, that's a great unknown, Tony. I could see both. I really can. He very much studied and emulated to different degrees people like BTK, so you're going to think he's going to want to do that, especially since BTK was so well interviewed after the fact in prison, in jail, like Kohberger most likely wants to have happen. At the same time, though, you want to be able to control a lot. I mean, also BTK had a lifespan of doing this, so he had a lot of things and details he could leak out over time and maintain control over a larger period of time, because his empire of killing was so vast.
Yeah.
Kohberger's is very, very narrow, so he doesn't have a whole lot he can leak. So if he leaks it all at the sentencing, then he's got nothing left in the barrels, basically. He may say a little something to kind of whet the appetite and maintain control without losing his only reservoir of tools he has to maintain interest. Because remember, that's what these guys do. They want to maintain their own control over their own notoriety and grandiosity, so they're going to be very covetous of the leakage they give. BTK, again, being really, really good at doing just that and holding things in reserve. And when you have someone like Kohberger, where you only got what, but I don't mean to diminish it all, where you have 4 murders, most likely not over a span of time. We're thinking, wise, this is his first and only. He's going to be covetous of holding as much as he can in, I would think.
Yeah, and do you think does he get joy would he get joy out of telling the families exactly what he did? Because I don't, with BTK, I struggle with it. I don't know that Dennis Rader was getting joy out of torturing those families and telling what he did. I think it was more so, I'm proud of the length and the craft. And it's a really weird way of using the word, but the craft of what he did and was able to get away with it, because those were unsolved forever. This was solved. I mean, so there isn't like the revealing of everything. Other than you forgot a knife sheath. It's pretty clear what you did. You got a knife and you stabbed these kids and you forgot your sheath.
So again, it's really interesting. Whatever he does, he's not doing it to get at someone.
Yeah.
In other words, if all of a sudden he came out at the sentencing and did just that, and he gives a full, we call it a full Monty on talking about exactly what he did, why he did it, it wouldn't be out of vengeance towards the families or to get them, because it's not about, everything's about him and his response. I would imagine if he did anything at all and gave any statement at all, it'd be him experimenting with, can this cause an emotional response in me? How do I feel when I do this? Does this make me feel better? So in other words, it wouldn't be done to jab at them, it'd be done for his benefit in some way to maybe experiment with, does this work? Does it? Because remember, that's what he's been doing. Is he's been experimenting his whole life.
Yeah.
This whole thing to me is one big experiment on, can I get an emotional response? He keeps dabbling in this. Let me try drugs. Let me try this. Let me do this. Let me murder a couple kids and see if that works.
Yeah.
And so everything comes down to him as an experiment for a reaction. And so if he does, it's not an intended for anything but himself.
If murder is what made him tick, what made him feel life, made him get some sort of emotion.
If it did.
And let's say if it did. Is Kohberger a risk to the population in prison? If that's what gets him off, and I'm not speaking, maybe it is sexual, I don't know. Is that someone who obviously he has nothing to lose anymore? I mean, if killing is his thing, I don't know that I'd want to be in a cell with this guy.
That's interesting too, because he's got a history now of violence, up close and personal violence with a knife, so that clearly doesn't bother him. The lack of fellow prisoners to be able to read him is also going to be a challenge. But at the same time, though, he took the lives of kids, which, I don't know if in the prison system it puts you in the same light as a pedophile in a prison system. But I've heard some people comment on some social media streams that he won't last a month in jail before he's murdered.
I put a poll out, actually.
So now that, to me, I'm not advocating anything illegal. No, I'm
not either, but I was curious.
You can imagine at least two families feeling really, really justified by that.
Oh, completely. Yeah. In fact, by the time this airs, the poll is probably going to have different numbers on it, but
what's your poll say? That
was my question, because I made some choice comments about a broomstick the other day when I was referencing Dahmer and Kohberger in the same sentence. I'm not endorsing it by any means, but, I get the anger. What we're looking at here right now, how long until Kohberger is removed from this planet through prison justice is the question that I posed.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Before New Year's, that is leading it 31.1%. In a close second, 2027 and never are tied at 26.2%. 2026 is at 16.4%. So you're kind of in the area of it'll be a little bit to never, or it's going to happen right away.
So they could actually put him in isolation for his own protection,
which they probably will and probably need to do for several years.
I wonder if Vegas has odds on him yet.
Do they do that for this sort of shit?
They do it for everything.
They got odds for everything. Oh my God. Again, not endorsing that, but it's certainly the vileness of this crime.
I know two families you might be.
Yeah, I'd put some money down. I'd see if there's This is the most hard. This is,
it's funny. I thought there'd be a feeling of relief when this one was done, but I
don't know.
A lot of horrible emotions on this one.
I think one of the worst things is that picture, that thumbs up in the shower.
Oh,
it's real. It is. He did it. He took the picture for that reason. It's everything 100%. We speculated on is true.
Yep. 100%.
Stepping back from my conversation with Robin Dreek, it's clear we're not just dealing with a cold-blooded killer. We're dealing with someone whose twisted motives stretch far beyond violence. Bryan Kohberger's decision to plead guilty was unsettling precisely because it feels like another calculated move on a chessboard he built for himself. It wasn't remorse. It wasn't redemption. It was control, pure and simple. Control over his narrative, control over the next phase of his life, and perhaps most chillingly, control over his own infamy. Robin's insights about Kohberger's motivations were particularly haunting. Think about it. The plea deal wasn't just about avoiding death. It was about Kohberger reclaiming his autonomy in a world that had reduced him to a courtroom spectacle. For someone like him, freedom might not mean the outside world. It might mean the power to choose his interactions, select his visitors, dictate the flow of information, and decide who gets access to his twisted mind. Kohberger didn't surrender. He seized the steering wheel. And now we're along for the ride. As Robin highlighted, the upcoming sentencing process poses another disturbing question. Will Kohberger follow the path of BTK's Dennis Rader? using the courtroom as a stage to painstakingly detail every gruesome act he committed? Or will he strategically withhold the worst details, doling them out piece by piece to prolong his spotlight? Whatever he chooses, it will be self-serving. It won't be an act of contrition. It won't be an apology. It will be a performance. One last chilling manipulation. And let's not overlook the practical dangers. Robin raised the unsettling prospect of Kohberger in prison. If murder was his twisted attempt to feel alive, what's stopping him from continuing this deadly experiment behind bars? It's a grim thought. We've seen prison justice before. Jeffrey Dahmer did not survive it. Is Kohberger now entering an environment where his past atrocities become a ticking time bomb? Will the other inmates see him as a monster or an opportunity? And frankly, how long before someone decides prison justice is their way of closing a case the courts didn't quite finish?
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast with Tony Bruschi and continuing coverage of the case against Bryan Kohberger.
It is chilling to realize that for someone like Bryan Kohberger, getting caught might not have been the worst case scenario. Wrap your mind around that for a second. Actually, it might have been the silver medal, the sick consolidation prize he was entirely willing to accept. All along, we wondered, was his goal to kill and disappear into anonymity, silently laughing as he lectured rooms full of eager criminology students who would never guess he was the monster they were studying? Or was getting caught, becoming infamous, and forever cementing himself in the twisted pantheon of true crime celebrity killers his real ambition? From day one, to unpack that psychological labyrinth, I'm joined again by retired FBI Special Agent Robin Drake, former chief of the Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program. Robin's an expert at decoding even the darkest and most cryptic human behaviors, and if there's anyone who can help us get inside the eerie quiet of Kohberger's mind, it is him. Today, we're taking a hard look at what justice really means in a case like Kohberger's. From the very first moments of his guilty plea hearing, it was clear we weren't dealing with typical courtroom theatrics. Instead, we witnessed something more disturbing. A man who seemed energized, eager even, to finally step fully into the spotlight he'd so violently stolen for himself. It's unsettling to realize that every punishment our system has to offer, imprisonment, isolation, notoriety, is exactly what Kohberger might desire. It's as if he's hacked the system, turning justice into a sick form of reward. Rob and I wrestle with that uncomfortable truth. Is this man actually happier now, knowing he'll forever be studied, scrutinized, and dissected? Could solitary confinement, the harshest punishment available, be exactly what he craves? An opportunity for endless reflection on his accomplishment? We are going to grapple with the terrifying notion that our justice system, designed to punish and protect, might inadvertently be giving this monster precisely what he wanted all along. Throughout our discussion, Robin lays bare the psychological intricacies at play here, how Kohberger's complete lack of emotional depth and his disturbing grandiosity make traditional ideas of punishment almost meaningless. We also dive into the conflicted emotions swirling around the victims' families, who must now live with the reality that Kohberger's punishment could very well double as his reward. Before we hear from Robin, I want you to consider one chilling thought. Can justice truly exist when the guilty see their sentence as their crowning achievement? Is there any punishment severe enough for someone who views notoriety as victory? In the comments section on YouTube, I want to hear your voice, so let me know what your thoughts are. If you're not on YouTube right now, if you're listening to us on the podcast platforms, hit subscribe there, please. And then also do join us on YouTube. Search Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi so you can comment and let your voice be heard. All along, I mean, from the very beginning, I think we hypothesized on the idea that did he do this to get on the ride, basically, to get on the horrible ride of murder and to experience what this is like? But what's the end goal? Was it to get caught? I think there might have been options there, and I don't think any of them were particularly of opposition to him. Again, my conjecture, I think the ideal goal might have been go do this, don't get caught, and then teach about it. And then and be this infamous person, but you're the only one who knows who you are. And then you can be the smartest person in the room because you can teach about it because you did it, but nobody knows that you did it. And you can be the one that has all these genius insights into this mind that can't be understood and can't be, isn't found because nobody knows who he is or where he is, but you're the one giving it and no one's the wiser. Like, the joke's on you. I think that was probably the ultimate. But I think he was resigned to the secondary prize, which wasn't Rice-A-Roni, the San Francisco treat. It was getting caught and then being exactly what you talked about, being the one that gets studied. But also then being that figure that's going to get the letters, that's going to get the attention, that's going to have movies made about him. I mean, and there doesn't seem to be a way around this one where he's not essentially getting what he wants. Honestly, I feel like the only way out of this one is him dying. So he's not there to enjoy it.
Hence, that's why 2 of the 4 families are distraught over the fact he's not getting death penalty, which he still wouldn't have died for a long time anyway. Yeah. It's the criminal justice system. I was thinking about this heavily last night. There is no justice that our current system has that can right this wrong.
No.
He wins.
Yeah.
He's he's on plan B, but plan B is completely fine with him. And I don't think this was part of it. Again, I don't think he thinks as in depth about himself or I think he does. His ability to be self-aware enough in these areas. I think we are helping him think this through. I'm not helping him, but you see what I mean? I think we're onto something he was intuitively doing. We're giving him a little more credit, I think, for being proactively strategizing plan B. I think he recognized plan B as it materialized in the jail cell when they approached him with the plea agreement. Then all of a sudden his brain went to plan B, and all of a sudden we're saying, oh yeah, he's winning. Ann Taylor won because she saved his life, and he's winning because he's getting the life that he wants. He wants to be studied. In other words, he's not teaching about himself, but he's still going to be the subject of investigation. I mean, I hate that. Yeah. It doesn't that tear you up saying it?
Our justice system is not designed for a human being like this.
No,
it is designed to punish. It is designed to give the worst of the worst to the worst people out there. But it's twisted when the worst of the worst want what it offers. And that's what's happening here.
The families, I don't want to speak for the families at all, but again, trying to put my best to put myself in those shoes, I would imagine they'd want him to suffer. They want him to feel remorse, pain, anguish, resentment that he's in prison arrested, all these emotions are what they want from him. And meanwhile, I think from what we're saying, man, he's gonna like it too much. It's horrible.
I agree. I feel like it's not. I mean, like, I was very pro-death on this one because I just feel like,
unless I tell you, I heard he's going to be maximum security. You know, I think the only justice can be done isolation supermax. Yeah. Because Robert Hansen, the FBI spy that was caught, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison in supermax. He got 1 hour of sunshine a day for his entire life. That's what Kohberger should get. I don't know if they can impose that sentence on him, but the only justice to me is isolation, no outside contact. You die in a cell. That's completely it, because you can't give him what he wants.
I feel like, and that's, again, it's opposite land here with Kohberger. At least in my opinion, It feels like it's like saying, Dracula, you have to sleep in a casket. You're gonna be in this small room and you get a casket, Dracula. That's all you get. Dracula's like, all right, this is great. I feel kind of like maybe this is like we're putting him in his natural environment. Like, I don't think he minds the isolation. I think he's made a lot of peace with that. But I mean, the level of isolation to which he's about to receive is beyond, I think, anyone's comprehension.
And what I mean by that too is, I think because the parents said, him being able to breathe, him being able to interact with other people, him being able to then profit in any way whatsoever from what he did is just another stab wound to the families. And so being able to deny him all those things is what I would think, even though he still might be fine with isolation, all the things we're saying, being able to at least deny him those other things that would prevent more pain being inflicted on the victims.
It's interesting because Catherine, when she was talking with Brian Enton on News Nation the other night, and I'm not quoting directly here, but paraphrasing, she said something to the effect of, he has the intellectual capacity to reflect on his actions, and she's really curious to study him. She's open to going and trying to get behind this brain, because she believes, from her own interactions with him when he was her student, that he is intelligent, that he can reflect on his own actions and doings. There's not the emoting complex necessary to it where he's going to necessarily feel appropriate emotions for what he's done, but it's just that cold, calculated, very mechanical way of reflecting. This is my conjecture here, where he can look back on it and maybe walk us through, kind of like in the Ed Kemper sort of way, or some of the other, infamous serial killers that we've seen. My mind's going to like Mindhunter, and some of the examples that that were written about in the book and demonstrated in the series, where I could see him being one that just comes out, has a fairly calm conversation with somebody, seems like somewhat normal on the surface, until he just starts talking about how he decided to go butcher these kids up one day, and talks about it like he's ordering a Arch Deluxe from McDonald's, even though they discontinued them 10 years ago.
To the detriment of the family, I do think we can learn a lot from him, because he doesn't strike me as an individual like many of these psychopaths, serial killers that we've had in the past. He doesn't strike me as a deceptive individual. Yeah. In a sense of, I think he, because his level of no emotion is so low that, and remember, psychopathy doesn't indicate your level of intelligence either. He's extremely intelligent. And I think, in other words, we have no data points of deception, with the exception of the fact that, he was hiding that what he was doing here, but then ultimately he did confess. Yeah. So it'll be really interesting, I think, because he is a different nut. He's like he's what you picture when you picture a serial killer. Mm-hmm. And so I think the family's loss is tragic. I'm hoping we can learn enough to recognize earlier other Kohbergers if people are going in to study him, because I think there's a lot to learn. What
are we going to learn? I guess that is the big question. And I'm not opposed to studying him. I'm not. I mean, as much as it's you're giving him what he wants, but are we doing it for the greater good? And I think, if I was Steve Gonsalves, again, you'd have to like really be checking me for a plastic gun when it comes into, I think, going into that sentencing.
Wholeheartedly.
Because I'd be willing to go down for my kid and like ending this. But
you got to give it time though, too. You know, you can't, you got to let the victims take a breath.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't expect them to be...
Let the pain and suffering and isolation wear in for a couple of years and then start maybe.
I do not blame them for their reactions and being vehemently opposed to this. Listening to Robin dissect the psychology behind Bryan Kohberger's chilling motivations is a stark reminder that not all punishments are created equal. For most of us, prison, isolation, and a lifetime of scrutiny would feel like the end, like a nightmare we desperately avoided. For someone like Kohberger, these things might feel disturbingly close to success. The twisted pinnacle of a life previously filled with emptiness and rejection, that's the grim irony we're facing. Our system is designed to punish. But for Kohberger, punishment could very well mean validation. Robin made a critical point about Kohberger's potential desire for anonymity, that dream of committing an atrocity and getting away clean, becoming the secret, smartest guy in the room who could casually lecture on his own unsolved crimes. Yet even failing at that, even getting caught, seems to hold an alluring attraction for him. Now he's guaranteed a permanent place in the annals of infamy, studied and dissected by criminologists and psychologists alike. He's achieved notoriety, precisely the kind he may have always desired. But what does that say about our justice system? Robin emphasized the uncomfortable reality that our methods of punishment, confinement, isolation, even death, may fall spectacularly short when faced with someone who actually wants those outcomes. It's horrifyingly like other cases. It's horrifyingly like offering Dracula a coffin and explaining to him, here you go. Here's your casket, and expecting him to be unhappy. For Kohberger, solitary confinement might not be punishment. It might be comfort. Isolation might not be torture. It might feel like home. We can't lose sight of the victims' families who are now forced to grapple with this brutal paradox. Their frustration and agony are palpable, understandably so, because how do you find solace when the punishment for the man who took your loved ones may, in his twisted mind, amount to reward? The pain these families endure doesn't fade with a guilty plea. If anything, it intensifies. Knowing the killer may see his punishment as validation. As Robin suggested, maybe the only true form of justice here is total isolation. Complete and absolute denial of human interaction, contact, and acknowledgement. But even that solution is imperfect because it still grants Kohberger the twisted notoriety he sought. Ultimately, our conversation with Robin leaves us facing some profoundly unsettling questions. Can true justice ever be served when the convicted murderer finds solace in notoriety? Can closure ever come to the families when the killer seems indifferent, even satisfied with his fate? This isn't just a discussion about one man's sick quest for infamy. It's a gut check moment for how we define justice itself. Because when punishment begins to look like reward, we might have to reconsider everything we thought we knew about delivering justice to those who least deserve it. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section on YouTube. If you're not there already, search Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi so you can join us there as well. Hit subscribe. You can watch our video version and get us there. And if you're on the podcast platforms, wherever it may be, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, hit subscribe there as well so you don't miss any of our coverage on this case and the many that we follow for you right here at the Hidden Killers Podcast and True Crime Today. I'm Tony Bruschi. Thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll talk again real soon.
Craving non-stop true crime updates? Press subscribe now and get the latest cases, analysis, and expert commentary delivered straight to your feed. Only from the Hidden Killers Podcast and True Crime Today.